Thank you very much. Apologies to Stuart McMillan and Emma Harper, but there's not enough time to take any more questions. And that concludes topical questions. We're going to move on now to our next item of business, which is a statement by the Cabinet Secretary, Jean Freeman, on Queen Elizabeth University Hospital Oversight Board update. And the Cabinet Secretary will take questions following her statement. So I would encourage all members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons, and I call on the Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the people served by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde deserve to have confidence that their local health board is improving its performance. The staff of our health service deserve the assurance that should they have concerns about the care of patients, they will be listened to and supported. And the families of children who have been treated at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital campus deserve to have answers to their questions and as safe an environment as possible for the care of the children. The actions I have taken in recent times in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde aim to deliver on these concerns. Last week, I escalated the board to level 4 for all aspects of its performance. This includes bringing in an operational turnaround director working directly to resolve issues in a number of areas, but including out-of-hours services and waiting times. But today, I will focus on the actions taken since I updated Parliament in December in relation to the board's increase to level 4 for infection control and family engagement around the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Our Chief Nurse, Professor Fiona McQueen, is chairing an oversight board that has identified the steps needed. First, a review of the care of children who had bloodstream infections from 2015 to date. Second, improving the quality of governance of infection prevention and control. Thirdly, establishing a technical group to ensure associated building works, water and ventilation are being progressed. And fourth, sustaining far better communication and engagement with patients and families. I have made a clear priority to make sure that families are given the answers they need about their children's time in the hospital, particularly about infections that may have caused harm or, in the worst cases, may have been the cause of death. A review of patients is looking at relevant cases in the paediatric oncology ward since the hospital opened in 2015. Since December, a team of Scottish experts from outside Greater Glasgow and Clyde has been assembled to undertake the review, led by Professor Marion Bain, who I have appointed to take over responsibility for infection prevention and control. To ensure rigour and robustness, the case reviews will utilise two approaches. An epidemiological review, which is validated by microbiologists and epidemiologists and uses international infection definitions to identify gram-negative infections in the selected group. The epidemiology review will define the frequency of infections and their distribution by person, place and time. Health Protection Scotland will lead this part of the work. The Paediatric Trigger Tool Review is an internationally validated approach that will help clinicians understand the effect infection may have had on children and will also help assess wider quality of care. Infection prevention and control measures, their use and effectiveness will also be assessed in relation to the outputs of these case reviews. Dr. Peter Lachman, paediatrician and Chief Executive of the International Society for Quality in Healthcare and one of the authors of the Paediatric Trigger Tool, has provided guidance to us on the use of the tool for this purpose and the augmentation required for these patients. As this review covers a significant period of time and a number of cases and complexities, a segmented approach will be taken. The first group of case reviews will concentrate on patients who received care in 2017. I think that's only appropriate given the long period of worry and distress that these families have endured. The first set of reviews will be completed during February. The review team considers that there are likely to be around 80 cases to be examined overall, but they will continue to keep that assessment under review. This whole approach, the use of the trigger tool and the other steps I've outlined, will be discussed with parent representatives who are working with us. The review must also answer questions posed by parents, and Professor Craig White will liaise with parents to ensure that this happens and they are kept informed of progress. As the reviews of each case are completed, the families involved will be offered an individual face-to-face report by one of the reviewing clinicians. I consider it imperative to the restoration of confidence that no one in this process is in the business of marking their own homework, not NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and not NHS Scotland. All must be subject to expert, independent and external scrutiny. The work of the review team will be advised and subject to scrutiny by experts from outside Scotland. Professor Mike Stevens, Emeritus Professor of Hemato-Oncology from the University of Bristol, and Gaynor Evans, Clinical Lead for the Gram-Negative Bloodstream Infection Programme at NHS Improvement England, will advise the review team and report directly to the Chief Nursing Officer. Presiding Officer, the Parliament will recall that in 2018, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde considered it necessary to close wards 2A and 2B at the Children's Hospital and relocate patients to ward 6A in the Queen Elizabeth. This move was both worrying and unsettling for children and their families, and the length of time has been longer than expected. Changes have been made in ward 6A to make available space for parents to have a rest and sometimes to themselves. Extra measures have been taken to enhance air filtering, alongside thorough and regular cleaning, and additional steps taken to bring aspects of play and the therapeutic environment of wards 2A, 2B to ward 6A. Now, welcome as those enhancements are, what is obviously necessary is for children to return to the wards specifically designed for them. Wards 2A and 2B are being refurbished to make good the problems identified in 2018 and to bring them up to the highest standards. I'm informed by Greater Glasgow and Clyde that their plan now is for work on these wards to be completed in the summer of this year, but progress towards reopening is being monitored by the Oversight Board's technical subgroup and by Professor McQueen. Patients will move back to wards 2A and 2B when these wards are fully ready and meet all required standards. Presiding Officer, Professor Marion Bain is now in post and is leading the case review that I've described, working with staff who have raised concerns and making sure their insight and experience is woven into the ongoing work of infection prevention and control in Greater Glasgow and Clyde. She is reviewing all aspects of working practice and governance, including how the board assesses, reports and manages incidents and outbreaks. The policies of Greater Glasgow and Clyde are being considered, but so too is the detail of spikes in infection experienced in the hospital and how the board responded both in its operations and corporately. I expect the Oversight Board to receive a report from this work about these matters by the time of the Easter recess. Alongside this, the Chief Nursing Officer has instructed a peer review of how the Infection Prevention and Control team approach and escalate infection incidents. And this review will report during February to Professor Bain. Professor Craig White is following up on feedback received from parents through surveys and individual meetings, and this is informing the work of the communications group of the Oversight Board. And I'm grateful to the parent representatives who are working with us on this. Greater Glasgow and Clyde's website has now has an improved section offering answers to questions that parents have asked, general questions about the hospital and the safety and care of their children. We will ensure that the families are involved in preparations to reopen wards 2A and 2B, with the questions that they have around that answered and taking into account ideas that they may have for the operation of these wards. And lastly, Presiding Officer, I want to update the Chamber on progress with the establishment of the public inquiry, which I announced in September last year. The remit and terms of reference are at an advanced stage of drafting and are currently being considered by Lord Brodie. Lord Brodie and I are committed to ensuring that the inquiry addresses the concerns of patients and families and to offering them an opportunity to comment on the terms of reference before they are finalised. I expect that the remit and terms of reference will be shared with families during February, and thereafter I will meet with party spokespeople as I have committed to do. Presiding Officer, significant work is underway in the month since I escalated Greater Glasgow and Clyde to level 4 for these matters. Significant work underway to address the legitimate concerns that have been raised by members on behalf of families and staff. The work is ongoing under the scrutiny of external experts. It is detailed and it will take time, but families and children and indeed staff deserve it to be done properly and thoroughly, and I will update Parliament further as progress is made. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cabinet Secretary, and I will now take questions. Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance a copy of her statement today. The last time we had a statement, I asked how many cases had been identified. Today, the Cabinet Secretary has said there's likely to be about 80 cases to be examined. Can I therefore ask, has the Cabinet Secretary personally instructed Professor McQueen to make contact with these families? And secondly, looking at the wider issues around the Health Board, given the concerns which were raised regarding the Vale of Leven, Queen Elizabeth, we know many of them, and the Gart Naval Hospital, why has it taken to this point for the Cabinet Secretary to act?
Secretary.
On the two questions that Mr Briggs has asked, I'm grateful to him for that. In terms of contact with families, so the first thing that is being done right now is that families, the representatives of families, are being talked through the approach on the review of cases, so they understand why it's a twin approach like that, and the process that will then be involved, and why the first segment of cases, if you like, out of the 80 have been identified, why those are the first ones to be looked at. And then families will be engaged. So then that information will be shared widely with all families. And Professor White will ensure that that happens, as well as making sure families have a copy of the statement I've made today, as he did in December. And families will then be asked, tranche by tranche, how individually, they'll be asked individually, how they want to be involved in this. At the very least, they will have that face-to-face talk through of the result of their own specific case by one of the team that has undertaken the review, the clinical team undertaking the review. But they may wish to have other involvement. They may wish to look at what is the information that you are reviewing. They may have additional things they want to add into that information and so on. So it's going to be very bespoke to what each individual family want to have. And in some instances, the patients themselves may be involved because we're not talking solely about young children, we are talking about young adults in many cases. In respect to the second question that Mr Briggs asked, I don't believe that, I don't understand what you're asking me. Why has it taken this long to act? I think we have acted appropriately at the right time. In terms of infection prevention and control, you'll know from previous statements that I've made, my engagement with the families, my involvement very early on from the time of my appointment in terms of the cryptococcus infection and the action that we took then. But Greater Glasgow and Clyde has not responded to those actions and to that support as I would expect them to do. And that is why, in terms of infection prevention and control, not only have they been elevated to level 4, which is a serious level for a board to be at, but also prior to that I instructed the independent review, which should report in the spring, and also the public inquiry into some of the wider and deeper issues around infrastructure build, both at Queen Elizabeth and the Royal Hospital for Children in Glasgow, but also at the new Lothian Sick Kids Hospital in Little France. So I think we have taken the appropriate steps, allowing boards to exercise the responsibility they have for the job that they are there to do, but acting where they are not taking that responsibility as seriously or as effectively as I require them to.
Thank you. Can I just encourage the Cabinet Secretary, we've got 12 members who wish to ask questions. Can I have slightly more concise answers, please? Monica Lennon, followed by Alison Johnson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. This remains a worrying time for many families and patients. We welcome many of the actions outlined and agree that no one involved in this scandal should be marking their own homework. However, for too long it appears that this has been the case. Families and staff whistleblowers have feared a cover-up of the many complaints, crises and tragedies that have plagued the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital since it opened in 2015. It is only now in 2020 that we are beginning to see serious action being taken. And along the way, the public have lost confidence in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. So whilst the Health Secretary has invited people to join or help the board, no one has been asked to leave, and that feels quite incredible. So, hand on heart, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, does she have complete confidence in the current leadership team, which includes the Chief Executive, and if so, why?
Cabinet Secretary.
With Ms Lennon, and I'm grateful to her for the comments she's made. I think it is and has been an unnecessarily worrying time for families and for staff. That is also why, in addition to the steps I've outlined, we have actively sought as a government to engage directly with families, to hear what they have to say, but also to make good use of those senior clinicians, senior microbiologist clinicians with significant expertise who had stepped forward and whose resilience and strength should be commended to work with us through this process, and I'm very grateful to them for the fact that they are doing that. On your point about no one being asked to leave, I should be really clear. Greater Glasgow and Clyde is now at level 4 in total. I have not ruled out level 5, but I do think it is important to give the board the opportunity to work under our direction to improve its processes. I think it's important that we are the ones looking at that, and we're not asking them to do that, that we have that external view in order to ensure that if there has been anything covered up, anything ignored, anything it missed, any wrong decisions taken, there is that external, not just us, but external to us, looking at all of that in order to uncover the truth of the matter on these infection issues, as well as anything else that might happen with the public inquiry. You know, it is now up to Greater Glasgow and Clyde to respond appropriately and to meet the requirements that we now have, that I have set out very clearly, that I now have of them. And as I say, level 5 is a very serious step indeed. I have not ruled it out, but I am giving Greater Glasgow and Clyde one final chance to respond appropriately and show that they understand not only what they need to do here, but what they need to do in a way that is sustainable for the long term.
Alison Johnson, to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary said that the paediatric trigger tool review will also help assess wider quality of care. I'd be grateful if the Cabinet Secretary could elaborate on the scope of that review and on what steps are being taken to ensure that actions, findings and decisions are communicated on an ongoing basis with patients, families, health service staff and the wider community who rely on the hospital. Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Last point about making sure that the progress that's made is communicated on an ongoing basis. That is largely being led by Professor White, but he is informed in that by the parent representatives who are working with him and others. I am due to go and visit both Queen Elizabeth and the Royal Hospital shortly after the February recess, and at that point I will take the opportunity not only to meet relevant staff, but if at all possible to meet the Area Partnership Forum, which, as Ms Johnson knows, covers all the unions involved on that campus, to ensure that they feel that they are properly engaged and being fully informed. On the question of the wider quality of care, so if when the trigger tool is used and we are looking at how were infections identified, how were the connections made or not made, is that appropriate in terms of time and place and person, that then also, whether or not that was done properly and to the standard that we would expect and those external experts would expect, informs what happens with the care, the use of antibiotics and prophylaxis and so on. So none of that is in any sense to put a question mark around what the clinicians involved in the care of these children have been doing. That is the highest quality of care and is widely recognised by many, including me, as that. But it's looking to see how proper management of infection incidents and the connections that are then made and the steps that are then taken, whether that then has a wider impact on any other care decisions that clinicians might make.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, to be followed by James Dornan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too am grateful for early sight of the statement. I'd like to ask about the wider problems in the board, because I also believe they underpin the problems at the Queen Elizabeth. Given, I'm grateful to see that the Cabinet Secretary has appointed an operational turnaround director. Given the size of the Health Board, the unprecedented nature of the problems besetting it, what qualities has she recruited for that post? How long will that post be in place? And how can we have assurances that when the operational turnaround director leaves office, that we won't slide back into the problems of the past?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the operational turnaround director is Callum Campbell, who is the Chief Executive of NHS Lanarkshire. He is particularly focused on improving the delivery of Greater Glasgow and Clyde in terms of scheduled and unscheduled care and out of hours, and he will also be able to consider and advise us and the board in terms of any additional cultural issues that exist inside that board in terms of pace of change, engagement with clinicians and staff, with an absolute focus on delivering high-quality services for patients. Greater Glasgow and Clyde's performance in these matters is not what we require it to be, and that is why we have not only escalated them to level 4, but brought in that turnaround director who is reporting directly to government on those matters. In terms of how long the person will be there, they were arrived on site on Monday. We will need to take a little bit of time for their additional assessment in terms of the oversight that we have of that, led by our Chief Operating Officer, John Conahan, as to what more needs to be done in order to improve the delivery of those services. That will give me a better idea of how long we will need him to be there before we see the improvements that we need. And as Mr Cole-Hamilton rightly says, those improvements are sustainable, because there's no point in doing this if you go in, fix it, walk away and it all falls over again. It needs to be sustainable. And that is why some of his assessment around the sustainability in terms of capability and capacity inside that board will be really helpful. We'll make our views about our decisions about how long it might be necessary once we have more information in that regard. And I'm happy to inform Mr Cole-Hamilton of that as I reach that view.
Thank you. I would stress once again, succinct questions, succinct answers. James Dornan, followed by Annie Wills.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank the Cabinet Secretary for the statement. I'm very pleased to hear about the commitment to improve communication with families. But can the Cabinet Secretary assure us that parents of children affected will be fully involved in the review of their own children's cases to ensure that the insight they can offer is fully utilised?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I can. They will be as fully involved as they wish it to be. And that accepts that some families will want to be more involved than others. And that's precisely why I said it should be a bespoke solution for each family, so that they can determine at what level do they want to be involved in those case reviews and to what level do they want to add additional information that they may personally have that they want to be considered as part of the case review itself.
Annie Wells, to be followed by David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. While this government fixates on what flag is flying outside, kids have been shifted from one contaminated ward to another. Parents have been left in the dark. Wards 2A and 2B were supposed to be opening soon. Now we hear it will be summer before the work's even completed. Cabinet Secretary, can you even guarantee these wards will be open this year?
Cabinet Secretary.
So let me be really clear with the Chamber. I am not fixated on flags. What I'm fixated on is the performance of our National Health Service, improving that performance and, most importantly, ensuring in this instance that families and staff are treated with the respect that they rightly deserve and are as fully involved as we can make it. I think all the steps I've taken indicate how serious I am about that with respect to Ward 2A and 2B. The board's assessment is that they will be ready for opening in the summer, but that is why in my statement I said that the Oversight Board will indeed be overseeing that and making sure that all the work that it needs to be done so that those wards can be opened not only safely but to the standard that we require them to be and that families are involved in all of that and are assured of all of that, the Oversight Board will indeed be overseeing all of that. And I'm sure Ms Wells remembers that I have appointed Professor Bain and others to make that direct work a reality for the families involved and the children.
David Torrance, to be followed by Anas Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what role additional expertise being brought in will play in ensuring that the measures that have been put in place to date are satisfactory?
Cabinet Secretary.
So we have additional expertise from both Health Protection Scotland, of course, but also Professor Marion Bain, who now has lead responsibility taken from Dr Jennifer Armstrong, the Medical Director at Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Professor Bain now has that lead responsibility for healthcare-acquired infection prevention and control. But also, as I said, Professor Mike Stevens from the University of Bristol and Gaynor Evans of NHS Improvement in England are providing the additional scrutiny to the work that we as government are commissioning and how that work is done, particularly around case reviews, the involvement of families and the lessons that then need to be applied in terms of overall infection prevention and control. And finally, the peer review that the Chief Nursing Officer has commissioned on how the infection control team works will be a matter of considerable importance, and we should have that report next month.
Thank you, Anas Sarwar, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Presiding Officer, this is a step in the right direction. Greater oversight and management is welcome, but we still haven't got to the heart of the problem. The Cabinet Secretary says if there is a cover-up. There is no if about it. The Health Board leadership has lost the trust of patients, parents and the public. We still have statements being issued by this Health Board that are simply untrue and deliberately misleading, despite the overall Oversight Board implemented by this government. Managers are more interested in saving their skin than doing the right thing. Cabinet Secretary, you have said they have one more chance. How many last chances do they need? What will it take for you to lose confidence in the leadership of this failing Health Board?
Cabinet Secretary.
In one respect, I agree with Mr Sarwar that what I have outlined today is not the heart of the problem. That's partly why we have the independent review. It's why we have the public inquiry. All of these layer in to find out exactly what has gone wrong with this hospital in its physical build and the environment, and then in how it is operated and how staff are engaged and involved. So I know you understand this, but it is worth making the point about the layers that are involved here. A lot of what you've asked me is similar to Ms Lennon, and I completely understand why you have asked that. The allegation that statements that the board have issued are untrue is specifically being looked at today by Professor Bain in her meetings with those senior clinicians who are very experienced microbiologists in particular areas of water and of ventilation in order to get to the bottom of that. If those statements are untrue, then not only will they be corrected, but we will pursue directly with the Chief Executive and the Chair of the Board why statements that are not factually correct are being issued. And my final point is this. I think I have made it really clear, I've certainly made it clear to the Board, that this is the final chance to respond appropriately to this level of escalation and direct government involvement and direction. You either respond to that or we go to the next stage. I hope very much that the board does respond, that they show themselves willing to accept where they've got it wrong, to learn how to get it right, and to put in place all the steps that are needed to provide the assurance to you, to me, but most importantly, to the patients in Greater Glasgow and Clyde. We will see if they do that, but we will not lie still for long waiting to be assured of that matter.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her information regarding the explanation about communication with the families so far. But can the Cabinet Secretary provide me some information regarding the ongoing support that's been provided to the families to provide the reassurances that the unit at the Queen Elizabeth is safe and also infection-free?
Cabinet Secretary.
So there are a number of ways in which that is done. There is the information that is now on Greater Glasgow and Clyde's website. There is the information that Professor White secures in response to individual questions that families may have. And that is an ongoing and iterative process. I think I made the point that there were 71 questions that arose from the meeting I had with a number of families, but there have been subsequent questions, and so he's engaged with all of that. And then we have the role of the group that works to the Oversight Board that he leads, but that has family representatives on it. And they are very clear in their scrutiny as to the quality of that engagement and that information. So there is more for us to do in this regard, but I think in terms of responding to what families have asked us to do, then we have responded fully to date, but there may well be, quite rightly and quite reasonably, more that they require of us. There are obviously individual specific cases that we've touched on in this chamber where very particular work is being taken forward in each of those.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid there's not enough time this afternoon to have any more speakers. Apologies to Brian Whittle, Daniel Johnson, John Mason and Tom Arthur. But we're going to move on to the next item of business. A short pause while members and ministers change seats.